All right, good afternoon. Where are we? Welcome to the Strategic Growth Council. Thanks for being here. We have a fairly short agenda today, but why don't we start on the far left with roll call here. Mr. Laird.
Here. And if I'm on your far left, that means it's even farther.
Just
ditto, Deborah, here.
say who you are and who you represent. We'll just go through it.
I'm here for Alexis Podesta with Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency.
Mike Flad, appointed by Speaker Anthony Rendon.
Nicole Capritz, appointed by Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins.
Bob Fisher, Governor's appointment.
Ken Alex, Office of Planning and Research.
Matt Rodriguez, I represent the people through Cali, PA.
Brian Annis from the Transportation Agency.
Great. Welcome, everybody. So I wasn't here at the last meeting, but the next thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. I will abstain, but do we have a motion to accept the minutes?
Second.
Okay, move in second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, unanimously with me. Me too. Okay. Let's see. Council members' updates. Anybody have anything they want to update us on?
After you.
Oh, okay.
Oh?
I just want to thank Louise and staff because we had a fantastic meeting in San Diego, a workshop about Strategic Growth Council, and we went over both the Affordable Housing Strategic Growth, Affordable Housing Sustainable Community, oh my God, all these acronyms, Sustainable Communities program, and we went over transformative climate communities. So we had a full house of environmental social justice organizations as well as affordable housing developers and local government officials. And so I think it was just another opportunity to sort of educate and do more outreach with San Diegans. And I think people got really motivated and we've had subsequent conversations. So I was really pleased with that. I'm grateful to the staff for coming down and putting on a great presentation for us.
Thank you. Brian?
Sure. And I wanted to recognize Deputy Secretary Kate White, who's here in the audience. I think many of you know. Kate will be leaving agency this month, and she's been very involved at the SGC throughout her tenure with agencies, going back to the end of 2013, correct? Yes. But very involved with the Affordable Housing Sustainable Community and other programs. And we had been missing her over the last 6 months because she was detailed to work on the Governor's Climate Conference and very involved in getting that event up and running that was so successful. So just wanted to collectively wish Kate well in her future endeavors.
And let me note for the record that Secretary Ross is here as well. And Louise, are you going to introduce Jesse? Okay.
Yes, so I was going to just do a quick staffing update. It's the most exciting part, some program updates and quick outreach updates. So I am exceptionally pleased to introduce Jessie Buendia, who's our new Deputy Director over here, and she joined us on October 15th. So we've been letting her drink from the fire hose and join all the meetings and everything like that. So really excited to have her on board as we are moving through a lot of material, especially over the coming months, but over the long haul as well. And she's got a tremendous background, came from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. She's done GARE work before. She's been doing community benefits work, and so really just an excellent addition to SGC. So welcome. So then I'll just do a couple quick updates. It feels like we met with one another not that long ago. as we've got a busy fall. But first, I just want to do a quick update on transformative climate communities, just because the round 2 application deadline is tomorrow, October 30th, and that will be both for implementation grants and the planning grants, and we will be making award recommendations to you all in December. And then also to report back that the round 1 grant agreements have now been completely drafted, and we've been reviewing those with the awardees and hope to have those finalized and executed in the next month or so. Another program update, we have another solicitation which is still open, or is open, for the Climate Change Research Program. And those applications focused on the transformative technology development are due November 9th. We've had an application webinar and workshop already, and have been getting a number of questions and are getting answers back out to applicants. We will be making award recommendations on that program as well in December. And then the round 1 awards are nearly all of our grant agreements are in place for those, and work is getting underway. I think we have a couple of those outstanding that we're still working through, but we're making really great progress there. And then finally, I don't have a slide, but a quick update on the health and all policies work. We've done an update on the capital cohort of the GARE program. The 2018 year is wrapping up, and all of the cohort teams are finalizing their racial equity action plans. The California Endowment has expressed interest in funding a second year of that. So in 2019, there will be an implementation year where these agencies and participants will be able to focus on implementing their action plans. We've got commitments from CDPH, the State Lands Commission, HCD, the California Arts Council, and SGC and OPR to participate, and then a couple of others who have expressed interest as well. At the next council meeting, we'll provide a more comprehensive update, but also specifically on the work that the OPR and SGC team has been doing through GARE. So the last 2 things, of course, outreach is continuing apace. People have been all over the state doing lots of different work, but I was going to highlight 2 specific pieces. One, which Nicole already touched on, which was our San Diego workshop, and just express our appreciation to Nicole for helping to pull together such a great crowd. We had about 75 people there, including assembly members from the region who welcomed everybody. So it was really great. A great event, and really, I think, pulled together the right group of people for both of those programs, so thank you. And then one other piece I just wanted to highlight is a recent report that some SGC staff worked on with the California Association of Local Area Formation Commissions, CalLAFCO, looking at the role of how to do sustainable land use planning, and some case studies of how LAFCOs have participated in that, and the roles and opportunities to continue to expand on that relationship. And so this was a new collaboration. This short paper, which is actually really easy to read if folks are interested, is available on our website. It was presented at the CalLAFCO conference earlier this month, and Ina Lupin and Emily Tibbett from SGC participated, as well as some staff from OPR and from CalLAFCO. And so it was a really excellent collaborative process, and I think a great product that came out of it. So just wanted to highlight it because it's a new area of work, a new organization for us to be working with. So those are most of the updates. If there are other questions or anything else, or I will let us move on to the meat of the agenda.
Questions, comments for Louise? Okay, we're on to Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, 4th final draft affordable, round 4. Ryan.
Yeah, we have a mouthful enough with the program name, so adding final draft, yeah, it's a little too much. But anyways, final guidelines for round 4 of fiscal year 17-18, here to recommend your approval of these guidelines that we've been working on for the past couple of months after we made our June 2018 awards for round 3. But thank you all for attending today to hear us out. And here we are. So we'll just be going through a quick overview of the program and its goals, as well as the proposed changes we are suggesting. by the way, I'm Ryan Silber, the program manager at the Strategic Growth Council for the AHSC program, joined with our partners over at the Air Resources Board and the Climate Change Investments Branch, who've been instrumental to helping us address new funding guidelines, requirements, and make sure that we're making community benefits and climate change addressing investments. Our partners from Housing and Community Development were unable to attend today, but just want to acknowledge their continued work as we implement and develop the program. So the goal of the AHSC program, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, created through SB 862 and with a continuous appropriation of 20% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We fund projects that reduce greenhouse gases through vehicle mile trip reductions and increasing the accessibility of housing and resources, access to key destinations, employment centers, and we're doing this through investments in housing and transportation and related programming in order to implement SB 375 and AB 32. There are statutory requirements for us to fund a minimum of 50% of our total investments in disadvantaged communities. We also have targets for low income and low income buffer zones. We last round funded 70% of our investments counting towards disadvantaged communities, while an additional 20% in low income communities. So we continue to address the needs of these communities to see further state investments. So far, through 3 rounds, we've awarded 79 projects for a total of $700 million. That's 6,450 affordable housing units supported by this program, as well as some non-affordable housing, so mixed market rate units. So we are doing our best to address the housing crisis here in the state, as well as significant greenhouse gas reductions through infill development. What we specifically fund are the housing developments themselves through grants and loans, as well as transportation infrastructure, including public transit and walking and biking access. We also fund a handful of programs related to increasing use of these transportation opportunities, as well as addressing air pollution. Our eligible applicants are largely public agencies and housing developers, for-profit or nonprofit. We also accept school districts and federally recognized Indian tribes. Just a nice graphic of what we kind of picturesquely view a sustainable community to look like. There's housing surrounded by access to destinations through multiple of transportation opportunities. We should probably update this to get rid of those single-family homes and build a little bit more mid and high-rise, but we'll send that to the graphic design team. So the AHSC application process, we will be releasing the application and the notice of funding availability in 2 days' time. So once the application period ends in mid-February, we'll begin our preliminary check that making sure all the threshold or those readiness requirements are in place. Before then, we'll be hosting consultations with different projects. There'll be the technical assistance program specific to AHSC that's put in place. That'll be going towards our lower capacity applicants who have difficulty creating competitive applications, as well as disadvantaged and low income focus. Then after our applications pass their threshold review or are otherwise disqualified, we move on to the scoring of applications, after which the initial score letters are sent to make them aware. An appeals process takes place, and we move on to the narrative review process, which is for our most competitive applications. We get together a panel of experts to review more qualitative subject matter that's a little bit more difficult than just checking off boxes. And then afterwards, we send out our final score letters and make awards recommendations to you all. So our threshold overview, our basic requirements of the program are locating improvements near transit to demonstrate VMT reduction and increase accessibility of housing and transportation options. Our readiness criteria are essentially making sure that once we make the investment, these projects are ready to be built and used within the next coming years. Readiness is a big focus of the program, so we make sure there's funding in place, all the approvals are set. These developers have experience making these projects before. We also have a couple other requirements related to more programmatic objectives, policy objectives, to make sure we are fully supporting best practice development and what we want to see in the state as sustainable development. Our scoring criteria, there are 30 points available for greenhouse gas reductions effectiveness, an additional 55 points related to our quantitative policy, or the more checklist approval that we can make sure explicitly is in place. And then a narrative policy scoring section, which, as I referenced earlier, is when we bring together a panel of subject matter experts to grade written narratives for 15 points. A total of 100 points available in all. So we had a public comment process leading up to inform these guidelines and our proposed changes. We readily accept public comment throughout the year and do receive some letters just ongoing throughout the process. But after we made award recommendations, we hosted debriefs with our unsuccessful applicants to understand any issues they may have had with the process or thoughts they had leading into the next round. We then hosted lessons learned workshops in 3 locations across the state to get in-person feedback about any technical difficulties similar to the debrief process, as well as present some proposed changes we were juggling with at the time. We had a public comment period after the round 3 awards were made, so just really trying to get a thorough comment period on what occurred in round 3, and then after the issue of our draft guidelines for this round, we had a 30-day public comment period as well. In all, we've received 58 public comment letters and numerous comments within them. So I'm just going to go into our proposed changes from round 3 into round 4. And really with our changes, we're aiming for consistent guidelines between our rounds, making sure that our unsuccessful applicants in the past are ready to apply again with better projects that address the existing requirements, but minimal changes that need to occur based upon the changes we're making now. And we are moving now towards this annual funding cycle, so money being available every single year, trying to make sure that we make sure this money is accessible to these communities. So we have added a threshold appeals process. So as I mentioned, our threshold determination, making sure that all of our projects are ready to be built. We officially added an opportunity for projects to appeal if they felt they were wrongly disqualified. Such a process just ensures that we're forthright and ready to review and make sure that if we've made mistakes that it's official, we will be reviewing those. For eligible projects, we've made an exception now for projects in our suburban and rural categories that their transit they use to qualify their project, that near proximity transit, can become operational by the time the affordable housing development is built. This just allows a little bit more flexibility for projects that are in the locations we want to see but maybe don't have that transportation connectivity yet. So they can implement it through this project. We didn't add that addition to our urban category classification, as we felt it may discourage some projects from expanding their transit service, seeing as these urban areas are technically more competitive and some projects are adverse to applying within that category. We added additional home ownership affordability criteria. We changed the average affordability of proposed home ownership units in our thresholds from 50% to 80%. So all income restricted units now can come in at a little bit higher affordability. So we, based on our conversations with potential applicants, think that this may help us see some home ownership applications that we've only seen in round one when the scoring criteria was significantly different. And this is also one of the methods through our work with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity that we feel is helping address institutional change within state government by trying to increase the accessibility of home ownership projects. For eligible costs, we added a couple different eligibilities here. We now award funding for air pollution mitigation programs. These could be through newly created supplemental environmental projects or community air protection programs, which, while those are still being developed, that we expect in future rounds that we may see some applications that contain these programs, as well as there's other flexibility for opportunity to implement these air pollution mitigation programs. Program cost maximum, we cap out our maximum program funding at $500,000. We've now, one of our thresholds is required transit passes for all residents of the affordable housing development. We now don't count that requirement towards this cap, so it allows our applicants a little bit more flexibility in what they decide to do with their available program requests for funding. We now have, we request our applicants, we allow them to ascribe 2% of their total project cost or total AHSC funding ask for employment outcome reporting, excuse me. The new CCI funding guidelines require that most investments do reporting on employment outcomes employment generated through these investments. So it will apply to most of the AHSC programs or projects, and while we're still working with our past applicants or awardees and determining what this sort of employment reporting process will look like, we've allowed our applicants to request some budget for what this potential reporting will look like. And we leave it up to them to determine what the cost will be, and relying upon their past experience to determine the proper amounts with the maximum at 2%. While we've always encouraged workforce development programs, the new funding guidelines now explicitly allow for funding of these programs, so we just made that now an eligible cost since we were already incentivizing them. Another program threshold requirement we added was mandatory education on air pollution exposure risks to the residents of the affordable housing development. So this could be done in conjunction with the Air Pollution Control District, or there's additional materials available through the Air Resources Board for general posting or providing this sort of information upon move-in. Our infill site clarification is just a minor technical change, saying that for our projects, they don't need to have 3 sides of their project surrounded by urban development, but rather 75%. Some of our rural areas, that exception is the difference between qualification and disqualification. We also added additional time for a CEQA and NEPA appeals period to expire. So projects that have that are cleared by the state but still have an existing appeals period open for external parties to submit lawsuits, we've granted them 30 days to clear up after the application period ends. If this means that an additional project passes through, that's great. If the appeals period results in an appeal or a lawsuit being filed, that project won't advance past our threshold review. So changes to our scoring criteria, generally just minor tweaks. As a new building code was passed and will go into effect for all developments in January of 2020, we've changed our incentivization of green building standards. We now only incentivize our top tiers. We eliminated a lower tier programs such as LEED Silver. Now we just promote LEED Gold, and we adjust our scoring slightly to represent the increased state stringency. So urban greening, we recognize this as a major component of sustainable community projects, the difference between a project with urban greening components or a community with them compared to without makes a huge difference in livability along with associated health outcomes. So we award 2 points now for, up to 2 points for $100,000 in urban greening investments and $200,000 for 1 and 2 points available. Our walkways measurement, we've now switched to a measurement in feet instead of miles or block faces, and made it explicitly clear we are just counting improvements or replacement or addition of sidewalks rather than including space in between, so strictly incentivizing new improvements. Key destinations, we award points for linkage to key destinations. So what we've done with this is we've added additional key destinations to our definition. It used to be just medical centers, public schools, grocery stores, and childcare centers. And we've now added pharmacies, parks, and libraries. And instead of 2 points possible to represent these additional categories, we've made 3 points possible. And this is in line with the definition the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee uses, which a lot of our projects, or all of our projects, refer to for additional funding. Our resident anti-displacement measures, we made some of these measures now only eligible for our local jurisdictions to implement, seeing as some of them just weren't applicable to housing developers to implement. For example, tenant supportive or tenant legal services. It would be a conflict of interest if our housing developers claimed they offered these. Business anti-displacement, there are, we added a requirement for maximum points in this category. At least one strategy must be newly implemented, which is in line with our continued incentivization of pursuing best practices. Additional scoring criteria changes, we eliminated our half a point available for demonstrating previous experience with program operation. We felt that this unnecessarily prioritized projects that have a history, and we want to see potential new projects that jurisdictions identify as promising being eligible for points. We eliminated the 2 points available for demonstrated sustainable community strategy alignment in the narrative process. This is a bit of a holdover from previous rounds where sustainable community strategy alignment is already a threshold criteria for the program. So it, in the end, came down to whether or not they wrote their narrative along the lines of displaying that when really all these projects are aligned with sustainable community strategies. We've added a community engagement tracker so our applicants can be more transparent about the community engagement that they're looking for, and we can be more transparent about what we're looking for in meaningful community engagement, which we really see as accountability to the public and instrumental to a lot of these planning processes. Our air pollution exposure mitigation, this is a new point scoring category, so this is where we reallocated those 2 points from our sustainable community strategy alignment. It gives an opportunity for our projects to demonstrate how how they are as protecting the health of the project area or residential citizens. And we include a couple of example measures they could implement. We expect that this is more of a reach for some of our applicants and keeping the program competitive, but keeping them aware of our priorities and making sure that future rounds projects are taking this into account. So while it may not see implementation in a lot of current projects, we anticipate it will in the future. We have new requirements for our awardees. As I mentioned, we have new employment reporting. This will apply to all of our projects that are already doing some form of employment reporting, whether that's fair wage or Section 3. They'll have to now report to us as well. And we're currently exploring if there's any synergies we can get with these other reporting programs. And we have a few months until awards are made, and I think that's sufficient time for us to figure out how to get quality data without adding additional burdens to our awardees. We also have changes to our performance milestones. This is the item that we brought for amendment to our previous rounds guidelines 1 or 2 council meetings ago. We've changed the language now for our upcoming rounds guidelines to allow exceptions to our 2- and 5-year milestones for construction start and completion date of the housing development, where our applicants can appeal for an additional up to 2 years for each of those milestones, granted at the discretion of SGC's executive director. And failure to comply with the milestones listed in their standard agreement will result in future applications being penalized, which is similar to what TCAC does with their tax credits. If they're not used within their time frame, then those applications are penalized on future rounds. So there are some items that we weren't able to address in this round due to time constraints. We are going to continue our conversations with MPOs and determine what sort of meaningful role they can play in future rounds and identify, write that role into the guidelines. And so we're continuing meeting with individual MPOs and CalCog to figure out what this will be. Employment reporting, as I mentioned, we're going to continue outreach with our previous awardees and working with the Air Resources Board to determine what sort of method we're going to collect this data in, as it will be ongoing into the future. And that data could be extremely powerful to identifying how these public dollars are benefiting different communities. Our air pollution exposure conversation, supplemental environmental programs, and community air protection programs are fairly new and still solidifying their implementation. So we're going to see how we can better align our program with their implementation. And home ownership, we made one overture this round to try and get more of these home ownership projects. We'll see where that leads us into the next year, and along with where the more housing dollars are available, and seeing if it makes sense for a program to keep addressing or keep looking at this issue. Our timeline, contingent upon your approval of these guidelines. I mentioned our draft release and public comment period. We are going to release our notice of funding availability and the actual application materials this Wednesday. Applications will be due mid-February, with award recommendations being made in June the following year. And as I mentioned, this will be the bones of an annual schedule in the future. Our recommendation.
It looks like we're stuck in 2018 forever, which might be okay for some of us, but.
Oof, yeah. I don't know. I think a fair amount of us would prefer we move on. Please, we appreciate your engagement in the council. So there's some things about 2018 that are worth keeping. Some of you may be more aware.
Questions, John?
You mentioned, I wanted to ask a question about the appeals that came up with somebody that I forwarded the information to. And it was someone that had a project, and I'm assuming this is the same item, right? It was someone in Los Angeles that had a potential proposal for 400 units. And the requirement that the appeal periods be run before they're eligible, and they have to run through all these different appeal periods, and the fact that this is switching to annual, so there's not multiple things. If they have an appeal period that's still going on the application, it bumps them out of it and a year ahead, which means that it may bump them completely out of competition. Now, I heard you addressed that somewhere, but I didn't understand it. It sounded like in a threshold, they might get an extra month to meet the threshold for being considered. Is that what it is?
Yes, so they can still have an open appeals period to their CEQA or NEPA determination, but it must end within 30 days of the application period. Any longer, we fear that might hold up our application review period. We're making threshold determinations at that point and moving on to the scoring process. So we didn't want to increase that time period too far down the road. And the reason we have these requirements in place is for project readiness. We can't have open lawsuits or the project not ready.
I completely get it, that you want it ready and you want it clear. But if we're moving to a year for an application round, all it takes is somebody filing a lawsuit and it bumps somebody out, and that is like problematic. And so the thing about it is that I appreciate the fact that you moved into regulations, but I think this is definitely an issue that still exists, and we should see how it comes up and whether or not it knocks people out of consideration that might have projects that would be very competitive otherwise, and whether the council should reconsider doing it annually or other things, and that just puts people at a disadvantage if they don't have a completely wrapped up proposal. I get what our need is, but I see what their need is, and I'm looking for the balance. And so I guess that we don't have much option but to go ahead with the way it's been tweaked. But I would really put it on everybody's radar, because I think over time that might be a real issue.
And we did reduce the time period for turnaround. It used to be more along the lines of 18 months. So it would be one way to address it, may be a shorter turnaround period, but we would heavily discourage that due to our internal staffing constraints. I think
I get it, but you see it constantly, it gets back to what our needs are, and I can see what their needs are, and it's trying to make sure that there's a balance between the two and that we're not holding up or at least throwing another roadblock in the way. And I just remember years ago when I was a city council member and mayor, we did this affordable housing project where we gave the land. It was 80 units, and every single regulatory thing was thrown in front of it, and we had to just knock it back to be able to build it. And I just don't want to be one of those regulatory roadblocks if somebody has a great proposal that we should try to figure out how to be helpful with. So just so that there's a recognition that there needs to be some balance here.
Sorry, I think we're trying to, with the window, because right now they would not be eligible at all if they hadn't closed, that window hadn't closed. So I think we're trying to strike that balance, and then also how if it goes longer, it ends up impacting how the scoring is done. And so we're trying, and I think, it's an area we would love to hear more about how we can tweak that, because then the other risk we run is that potentially money gets tied up in a project that can't move forward.
Well, I get all our risks. I get that clearly, but you see, we're also the ones that are potentially moving from multiple grant rounds in 1 year to one grant round in 1 year, and where somebody might have a chance to have a bite at the apple in different times, we're taking that and changing that a little. And once again, I get what a pain in the ass it is to run multiple grant rounds in a year. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but it gets to the balance. Like,
I
how
think
do we
we're
make
actually
sure-
going the other direction.
Yeah,
We're
we're
actually
moving
speeding
faster.
up the grant rounds. It used to be 18 months, and now we're going to 12. So actually, I think it's,
But how many are there in a year? One?
One, yes.
Okay.
so there used to be, two every 3 years. So this actually is narrowing both. It's giving them a little time for the appeal, and it's making the rounds more often. So conceivably, they could go into the next round in the next year. There's more to be done on this for sure, but I just want you to.
Well, no, I've done my job, which is to call everybody's attention to it and hope that it's in their head when we go forward. So I appreciate that.
Okay, Matt.
Well, it's still in my head. Maybe you could explain how this process works, the appeals process, and how it corresponds to CEQA a little bit more.
It's not my area of expertise. I know if there's no CEQA clearance, the project wouldn't be ready for development. So, closing of the appeals period, if there was a lawsuit that resulted, then the project could be delayed for other reasons beyond us. So the fact that they wouldn't have funding.
And that's that's a threshold requirement? Is
Our
that-
threshold requirement was before that they have all of their clearances, environmental clearances. So this would allow 30 days for this appeals period, that's a CEQA and NEPA process, to close, to make sure that determination is final.
Well, in future, we can somebody should take a look at that, because, I mean, under CEQA, as Ken knows, I mean, unless there's an injunction or something, if an EIR has been prepared, there's a lawsuit, a subsequent project, or a subsequent agency, however, has to look at that project. They're supposed to assume that that EIR is fine, and they're not held up by the fact that there's a lawsuit. I'd like us to at least, or I think the SGC should at least be in a position to take a look at a project like that and sort of weigh out, well, hold it, what do we think of the prospects of the lawsuit, or what do we think of the prospects of the project? And maybe we want to go ahead and authorize the money anyway, knowing that the litigation may go ahead, but I'd at least like to have that option, or I think a future council might at least want to have that option. And that's sort of consistent with the way CEQA is supposed to work as well. I mean, you shouldn't assume that there's necessarily a problem until a court has issued some sort of injunction or something. So I just like to have that option to take a look and think about holding out funding for a project like that, depending on the merits of the project.
So a couple of comments, just so we're all on the same page here. So the way the rules work right now, unless it has the final CEQA or NEPA approval, it can't get funded. So this is actually making it a little bit easier to get the funding. The other point is, as I understand it, that bank funding is usually not available until the CEQA process is completed, and that is probably a bigger deal than our funding. So having said all that, your point is completely valid, which is, you know, we may want to take a look at what the likelihood of the project going forward is if we're able to figure that out without, you know, causing too much trauma.
Yeah, and as I recall that the previous, we want you to have everything in place, that really stems from the beginning of this program when we knew there were a lot of projects out there, and so we wanted to go ahead and do them. Now we're in a slightly different situation, and so I think that it just argues for a little bit more flexibility on our part, and I know we're heading in that direction. I'd encourage us to look a little bit further, and particularly if it's a threshold requirement. Isn't that something that the SGC itself could consider?
Okay, great. Other questions, comments? Nicole?
Yes, first off, thank you so much for your presentation and the phone call that you had with me to help walk me through some of these things. I just have a few more comments, and I actually want to echo the comments of the two secretaries because, you know, living and practicing in San Diego and promoting infill and transportation as a climate solution. And unfortunately, we're seeing in a lot of neighborhoods when these infill projects are proposed that the neighbors immediately appeal just because it's their way of trying to, I don't really know what their end game is, but unfortunately, sometimes the end game is to stop that project, even though it's clearly exactly what we need to do to reach the climate goals. So I'm sensitive to that issue as well. I don't have a solution, but that is something I'm sensitive to. So for the green, I know you went over this with me once. Do you mind again?
Not at
I'm
all.
still trying to understand the green building scoring because the building codes to me keep getting more stringent. So I'm wondering why there are any points associated with them.
So the Green Building Code is generally more focused on just the building structure itself, while many of these green building rating systems focus a little bit more on a holistic approach, the landscaping around it and site selection. So and beyond that, I think the building structure from our research, we understand it's still further incentivized beyond the building code. One of the processes we incentivize is Cal Green, which is through the building code. So if they reach the second tier of voluntary building code measures, we award that. But we still felt that while the gap is closing a bit, that there's still ground to be closed. Additionally, from what we hear in the workings, we think some of these building code systems are going to be increasing their requirements to match the continually improving building codes.
Right. Okay. And the second one, and I know also this is like an area of ongoing conversation, is about the points that you're no longer having with projects, whether they're, to determine whether they're consistent with sustainable community strategy. So can you just explain what the threshold is now versus what did the threshold change, or you just were, it was like doubling?
Yeah, the threshold is the same. It's the threshold, most simply put, is that the project must be aligned with the sustainable community strategy. What we saw in our previous round was the difference in points between different applications was how well they were able to prove that in writing. While each of these projects is already passing our threshold, we felt it was unnecessary to start grading them on whether or not they could point out that infill development was a goal of their sustainable community strategy or prioritizing public transit. So we felt it was a bit redundant and not scoring our applications on their actual, their quality, but rather just grant writing ability.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. But the criteria in and of itself, you're saying, if you meet the basic criteria, you automatically are qualified. You're automatically consistent with sustainable community strategy.
Well, they have to actually demonstrate their alignment already. So it was a little bit of a redundant process there.
Okay, thank you.
I spoke to Louise about this, and I'm not sure if she spoke with you. The size of this this round is 400 million or something?
Approximately, yes.
And the rounds we've had thus far have been, what have been the sizes of the previous rounds?
Our recently awarded round was 257 million. The first round, I believe, was 100 million, and the second round, almost 300 million.
One of the concerns I have, given the size of this round, is that, and I've seen the council, we have great desire to get the money out, but I think there's a possibility that we're going to be awarding money to projects that maybe that aren't good enough. And because we have a lot of money this time, we may be, and no bottom threshold, no floor above which projects have to rise. It's possible that we'll actually have fewer projects than we have money for. And so I suggested to Louise that perhaps we think about a minimum score for projects, and if they don't hit that score, then we just don't put the money out. Because I'd rather hold the money back for better projects in the future than putting it out to projects that score 50 or 60, or I don't know what the right number is, but if you get a D on a test, you're getting a 60, and we shouldn't be putting money out to D-level projects. So I just wonder, Louise, whether you had a chance to think about this and had any kind of a proposal that might satisfy kind of my criteria for high-quality projects.
Well, I can speak to that. We've seen a pretty tight spread between our applications. Part of our awarding the greenhouse gas reduction strategies, those are scored on a curve. So isolating that, the strictly competitive policy points, we saw an average score, I think, of about 47 out of the 70 points available. 47 out of the 55 quantitative policy points. So those policy criteria are tightly spread. It's the greenhouse gas reductions, I think, is where we start to see the determination of competitive versus non-competitive. It's possible that could be the scenario. Based upon our last round's awards amounts, we could expect about 30 awarded projects in this upcoming round. We saw the fewest number of projects applied in this previous round at 55. In previous rounds, we've seen over 100 applications. We think some of that had to do with the uncertainty around whether or not there'd be funding available and projects not taking the steps to prepare applications ahead of the application period opening, which is pretty essential to this program due to the complexity. So we don't think that will occur, though it is a potential possibility, and we could, at your approval, come up with a number as a benchmark of where a minimum score would be, taking into consideration the curved scoring.
I'd be interested in hearing other council members that have maybe faced this kind of thing with other projects, and because in a way, I don't want to put staff in a position where you're coming up with a subjective decision that sort of this, you're going to draw the line at a particular place. I think it's sort of up to the council to say that these are high-quality projects and these are not high-quality. I mean, you guys do all the scoring, but it may be helpful to staff for us to give you some guidance in this area. I don't know. You all have done a lot more awarding in projects and scoring than I have, so I'm just raising the question.
Well, I kind of feel like, given what you just said, that we may not have enough information, and if I was here for longer, I'd like to get a sense of what we think of the spread of projects that we've granted to and those that we haven't, and particularly on the greenhouse gas emission criteria that you identified, which I guess is about 30 points worth. So what's the lowest point total that we've given a grant to, and what does that mean in terms of greenhouse gas reduction? So before we can kind of draw a line, which I think I understand your point and it makes sense to me, I kind of want to know what it means in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. So maybe we can give direction to you to do some quantitative evaluation of the applications we've already had.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually following our conversation. Ryan and I talked about this, and I think we could certainly bring back a bit more of an analysis of what the past rounds have looked like, and maybe also demystify a little bit of the curve, around the GHG scoring, and could certainly bring that back to the council in November.
Okay, I think that would be
That would be
helpful for us
helpful,
to.
and we could leave this as an open question that we could have some more thoughts on at that point, since that's further down the road and doesn't directly affect
the guidelines. And we can still approve the guidelines, but just.
And it could, I believe, be an amendment to how we, if we needed to make an addition.
Okay, that would be fine. I have two other questions. The one is I was interested in seeing the air pollution education work. Did you consider doing some climate change education work too? I mean, if we're going to be adding a topic into sort of as a requirement, why not let people know about climate change, since that's kind of the main purpose of what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, we had not considered that. We viewed the air pollution education item as, I guess, more closely related to the investments we're making as into the impact of these individuals, as citing and pollution exposure through where you live in the traffic exposure, for instance. But climate change isn't one of the objects we've considered. We could look into that possibility.
Let me quick comment on that. Obviously this program is climate change, greenhouse gas related, so that's the purpose of it. The last year, you may recall that there was an issue that came up as to location of infill near roadways in particular, and that we were not evaluating specifically the issues around potential pollution from roadways. So I think that's where this comes from. And so it's an education in part for the developers. And so I think that being in this program at all probably means that they are sensitive to the climate issues. So you can certainly explore whether there's something to do in parallel, but that's just so you know okay. That's the history of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something you guys should think about. And the last thing was it was interesting to note that we're still discussing the MPO role. I mean, this has been on every topic since we started this program, and we either haven't made enough progress, or we can't come up with a satisfactory role that works for the MPOs and for the Growth Council, but like, let's just get this figured out. It's taken, as long as this program's gone on for it to do this, and we've got to come up with something that works. And Ken, I don't know, I know you've seen this before because you've been sitting up here with me. So how do we get beyond sort of that being a topic for further exploration?
Well, I think that I know the MPOs are ready in the coming year to really make a push for what they would like to see, which is to have some of the money as almost in form of a block grant.
Right.
And we haven't come up with a way to do that is satisfactory so far, but I know in talking to Louise, and we certainly can comment, that they're expecting a renewed effort, and the staff is ready to try to see if there's a demonstration approach or, some way to try to get it moving next year. I don't know if you want to comment or not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we've been, thinking about, this question relates actually also to the SCS consistency. Can we focus in on even how to put something that's a little more meaningful together around that? We've talked about piloting some regionally customized approaches, and so we're really eager to reopen that conversation and see if we can come up with some pathways forward. And that might mean trying a couple of different ways, working with one or two MPOs, and so that's a conversation we're eager to get underway and see if we can, make this a meaningful partnership and collaboration around the program. So,
I guess where we are now is that sort of yet another year we're not even trying a different approach as a test. Is that right?
not within the guidelines, not this time. I mean, I think what we'd like to do is try working on, coming up with different approaches that we can integrate into. I think but it would be in future rounds.
I mean, maybe at one of the next couple meetings before we lose this group, most of this group of council members, we can come back with some proposed tests that we're ready, and at least some of the MPOs are ready to move forward with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd be happy to
Okay.
try to bring some stuff back.
I was doing fine until Bob said, maybe we try to get this done before we leave. And I think it occurs to me, I'm looking around the table, and I think when we had our animated discussions on this, it was 2 executive directors ago. It was with half the people sitting up here not being up here. Mm-hmm. And and we thought we resolved it, I think, 3 different times at this dais and gave direction to the staff, and it kept flying back at us without the direction having been taken. And the heart of the whole thing is that the MPOs made a run at this funding at the legislature and wanted to get it for themselves. And when that didn't happen and they lost, they wanted to get it administratively through us. And we were basically of the opinion, you made your effort and it didn't happen. And so we actually spelled out 3 different times at the dais that we'd love to figure out how to get their input into this process, but that we would retain the ability to complete the process. And so there's one of 2 things going on. Either after 8 years that isn't accepted and there's going to be another run at it, or they don't want to take the ability to feed into the process in a way that we legitimately listen to their needs and make sure they're included. And it's like, and I will not be thrilled to have to relitigate that again. That is what the issue gets down to. And we have litigated it tons of times, and it could be that with Bob's point is there's just an inability to accept that it's where it is. And it's like, so I don't know, if we have to spend another hour on it, it may be a recipe for me to go up to the top floor of this building and jump off it. But it's like, if it just puts us back in that same place again, it's just not very constructive.
Let me make a suggestion, which is for staff to have an initial discussion, maybe with the MPO trade group, and see if they have something in mind that is not, full autonomy on the dollars, but that, might get us to at least a demonstration in one or two regions.
Yeah, I would just say that John's absolutely right. We've gone through this many times before. I would anticipate this issue will never actually go away because I think the MPOs will continue to look at this as a potential source of funding. But I think that as far as this council is concerned, we've looked at that issue many times before. I mean, we've always said, look, we want this program to work and we want it to provide funding for good quality projects. And as we see problems, if we see issues out there, we're missing projects or projects aren't getting to a certain area or there's a better way to do it, we're always open to that. But just in terms of what's better from our perspective at this point, we've looked at the question of do we want to do block grants, do we want to deal with the MPOs, or do we want to look at this from a statewide perspective and decide where the state wants to put money that's coming out of a state program in a way that will benefit the state as a whole. We figured that that authority should be retained by the council, and that's the way we should be looking at this. So I don't see us changing that in November or December. I know that from the staff perspective, you're probably going to have to go through these discussions again because there will be a changed council and the MPOs want to see whether there's been some change in view as a result of the change in administration. But from our perspective, I haven't heard anything that has caused me to believe that we need to open this up and look at it again unless somebody can demonstrate that there's some issue, there's some problem, we're missing something, there's some issue, because we have gone through this quite a bit. So I wouldn't put it high on our priority list for the next 2 months. I understand from a staff perspective, you're going to have to prepare yourself to deal with this issue in January or February when it's conceivable that John and I aren't here. But I mean, you can't be sure. But it's just, unless somebody tells me there's an issue or a problem or we're missing projects or there's some problem that we need to deal with, I think we've looked at this issue ad nauseum.
Well, without beating this, just so that we're clear on what the issue is, at least in part, is that the MPOs feel like that it's difficult to implement their SCSs without having some additional control over which projects get funded. And so I'm not saying correct or incorrect. I'm just putting that out. Okay.
And I think we've already talked about this too much, but just for Louisa's benefit, when we were litigating it regularly earlier in the administration, one of the issues is that all MPOs, and I'm falling guilty to using the acronym. There's been one time in this meeting already that somebody asked me what an MPO was, Metropolitan Planning Organization, a lot of times with the Regional Council of Governments. Otherwise a COG, which somebody will say at some point. But the point is that all of them are not created equal, and that was what came up also. And I was, in a past life, the head of an MPO, and we were mildly functional, and then it went into a greatly dysfunctional period where one half was suing the other half, and every time there was a closed session, half the people had to walk out of the room because they were the half suing the other half. And so people operate on this out of whatever their own one is or whatever their experience is, and yet they are really different. And I think there was some trepidation about having a uniform policy about this because when Darrell was doing 375, I worked with him on that because that was the original part of bill, which was, it really had MPOs in it, and at the time, all hell was breaking loose in mine, and I said, please allow us to get the money and get the stuff and not put it into the dysfunction. And so when we were talking about this all the previous times, some of those things were the issues, and when I heard you say 1 or 2 pilots, it's like maybe you can find the most functional ones, but it's like those were the kind of the issues that we were talking about before.
Okay, so now that we've solved that, any other questions or comments? So we have a proposal for staff recommendation. Do we have a? All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second and a second? We have a few comments from the public, so we'll go to that now, starting with Alicia Sebastian, followed by Tyrone Buckley.
I have my munchkin mic. Okay, I'll stand over here. Can you guys all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, though? All right. My city council chamber, I'm used to standing here. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me today. Alicia Sebastian, I am with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. We are also members of the Rural Smart Growth Task Force. CCRH members serve rural, farm worker, and American Indian tribal communities, and about half of our members also work and develop in urban areas as well across the state. We're super excited to move forward into round 4 of this program. Each year we see stronger and more impactful projects. Technical assistance efforts, especially in overall capacity building and project scoping, have been successful in engaging communities who have not yet found success in this program. We are grateful, as always, for our growing partnership with SGC and HCD staff especially, and it's really an exciting time to engage in this program, so we're all getting in gear. However, and of course there's a however, else I wouldn't be probably standing up here, we are disappointed to see that so many, or the majority of the comments that we submitted in response to the draft guidelines were not only not incorporated in the final guidelines, but that there have been some additions with which we've had less than a week to review. Recent guidelines also no longer include the track changes that we used to have, so we could really easily see what's been addressed or what hasn't. The memo is still helpful, but not quite it's not quite at the level that we need to be able to go back in. Although we do have some very savvy ways of comparing PDF documents to try to find that. And as advocates, applicants, and technical assistance providers, we are still left with more questions than answers. While we are cognizant of the time constraints within which staff we know is trying to work, especially as we get on this more consistent timing, we respectfully request that more adequate time be given between guideline revisions. Request the returned use of those track changes between the guidelines, and that we are also respectfully requesting that council provides explanations as to why specific changes were or were not made. Hard to read over and over again that something just wasn't even kind of acknowledged, and some of these are very significant recommendations or significant changes. One such of these kind of more significant or critical recommendations that has been echoed across the state is the inequity in project area types. Smaller, less resourced communities competing against much larger, well-resourced areas. This is specifically where we see this in the ICP, and what we've seen is that the AHSC award data demonstrates that the same level of GHG reductions are occurring across the projects within the ICP project type. But the differentiation between who's actually getting awarded within ICP often falls into these other areas of scoring. And those are the areas of scoring that we believe are much more dependent on the local resources and capacity of the community. We ask for the council's support in helping all of California's communities to engage in meeting our state's climate goals as we get ready for round.
All right, Tyrone, followed by Carrie Luchins.
Good afternoon, Chair, council members, and staff. Tyrone Buckley with Housing California. I'm the policy director there. We're a member of 2 coalitions that share AHSC as a policy priority and the continued success of the AHSC program, the Sustainable Communities for All Coalition, as well as the Rural Smart Growth Coalition you just heard from. Both coalitions really formed in recognition of the role that housing can play in addressing the state's climate change goals and reducing GHGs, which Chairman Alex has articulated to our constituency many times as the prime goal of the program, and we hear that. Our comments on the Round 4 guidelines align with the Rural Smart Growth Working Group we signed on there, but they also align with the comments made by Enterprise Community Partners, as well as the California Housing Partnership that you received. My primary comment today is around process, some of which Ms. Sebastian went into. We've had a very strong history of constructive dialogue with SGC staff. Together we've worked to improve the program, whether that's through better geographic representation or stronger program guidelines, and we've been there through every round, and we've been there as part of one of the organizations that helped fight for the program to get created. And I often personally hold up SGC staff and the work they've done over the years as really a model for other government agencies to emulate. But this round has seen some changes to that engagement, and in the past we have received more feedback on our comments that we've made, and we'd like to see a return to that form. To date, we have not had the benefit of SGC's staff feedback on our comments, and we were surprised to see this item agendized for this meeting because we hadn't had that discussion yet. We encourage the staff and council to endeavor to maintain this level of engagement because it really has been a team effort to improve and defend this program. My organization works really hard at making sure that the legislature knows how high of a priority this is, with some of the folks who are here today too, doing lobby days around the strong policy goals, lobby days around maintaining high funding levels. So we really feel like we're a partner in moving this program forward. And we've seen some really good signs too from SGC on staff engagement. We communicated some concerns about transferring of funds from the TCC program to from the AHSC program to the TCC program, and staff was very responsive, as well as HCD staff and TCC staff. So we see good signs, but we just today want to encourage continued strong public participation, and we want to continue our strong relationship with SGC staff. Thank you.
Okay, Carrie, followed by Hamid Tayeb.
Hi, my comment is actually not with regards to this agenda item, so I can wait until. I'll wait.
Hamid?
Sure, I can use this. Good afternoon. I'm Hamid Taib with Habitat for Humanity. And in round one, thank you for supporting us. And we use the funds to be able to do homeownership in the project was qualified, as well as they scored well enough to do that. So we were able to offer homeownership project using your funds. But round 2 and 3, we were not. Across the state, we could not because of the changes in the requirements and also scoring level. And staff was very good about meeting with us in this round and addressing our needs and talking to our needs. And we've changed the affordability level to whereas it was in round 1, so we can qualify. But yet, still we can't qualify across the state, bring any homeownership project to you because the density is does not work for us as a main component. We've issued a lot of comments, and one of the major comments was the density. We do provide 2, 3-story homes and very close to transportation, in fact, walking distance to transportation, which qualifies for a reduction of emissions because less cars are needed. But we don't qualify because density is not there. We ownership project, we do have to qualify, provide a lot of easements and driveways and that sort of thing that apartments do not have to do that. So therefore, we don't meet the density requirements. So I'm here to let you know that you probably won't see ownership project at least from Habitat this round. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let me make one observation on the process, and then Louise or Ryan, if you want to comment, that would be fine. A couple of things. One is we do want to try to get funding out with this particular council. We feel very tied to this program and would like to have a chance to fund this round. And also a concern that if we wait while the council gets reconstituted, it could delay it. So some of that may explain why the process has been somewhat truncated. I'm assuming we can do the track changes going forward. Unless there's some issue with that.
Yeah, the track changes will be issued within the week. We'll also be issuing a memo detailing our proposed changes, and we can absolutely connect on some of these public comment letters about why their changes were not made to the guidelines.
Great, appreciate that. All right. Any comments from council members? Cole.
I mean, I do just have to comment that it is awkward to issue the track changes after the decision. Okay, I mean, that feels awkward.
No, I think the idea is going forward, we'll get back to doing that. The track changes, I'm sure, will be useful to see it, but your point is obviously right that we want to do it before.
Right.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the guidelines are adopted unanimously. Okay, we have public comment period is next, and Carrie, you're back.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Lutchins. I'm with Satellite Affordable Housing Associates and here to speak with regards to Manzanita Family Apartments, a Napa project of ours which was submitted in round 3 of the AHSC program and was not awarded, which we believe was due to a mistake in the review of a GHG clarification made during our appeal. We have discussed this with both Strategic Growth Council and Housing and Community Development staff and have been told that the Air Resource Board has been performing an in-depth reevaluation of the application's documentation supporting the GHG reductions and the clarification in our appeal. That process has been ongoing for 2 months, and we have still not heard back. Had the appeal been correctly reviewed and the GHG reduction score adjusted, it is clear from publicly available data that the project score would have been competitive for funding in round 3. In fact, in the top third of awarded projects for total project score. In addition to the $10.8 million in AHSC funds that the project and Napa County have lost as a result of this, the award determination also caused the project's IIG final point score to decrease, a change that meant an additional $1.6 million was not awarded. These funds were critical to filling a financing gap for a project that will provide 51 new homes for low-income families and homeless households at a time when affordable housing in Napa County is needed more than ever. As one measure of the current crisis, and in large part due to the devastating wildfires that swept through the region last year, this year's point-in-time count revealed that the number of unsheltered homeless individuals in the region has increased 33% since last year. By all accounts, the statistic represents an alarming need and one that we hope the Strategic Growth Council will address. We understand the AHSC application and appeal review process is complex and requires coordination of 3 state agencies. We hope that the Strategic Growth Council, as administrator of the program, will work with Air Resource Board and Department of Housing and Community Development staff to swiftly complete the reevaluation of this application. And if the review concludes that GGG points should be reinstated, we ask that you consider a retroactive Round 3 award to Manzanita Family Apartments so that we can swiftly start construction on these critical homes and implement key local transit strategies. Thanks so much for your consideration.
So I do want to push back on you a little bit because, as I understand it, one of the issues may be that the original application had some deficiencies. Now, that's being resolved in the appeal process, and we'll see how that goes. So we will, and I know you're talking to staff, which is exactly the right thing to do, but we will make sure that whatever the resolution gets done quickly and efficiently so you know where you stand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments? This is like the shortest Strategic Growth Council meeting ever. Thank you. We are adjourned.
I